The wind was a mournful voice, keening through the broken panes of the cabin window, a lament for all that was lost, for the man whose hands had built these walls and whose laughter no longer echoed within them. Sarah huddled deeper into the threadbare shawl, the cold of the late autumn air seeping into her bones, a chill that mirrored the icy dread in her heart. It had been 3 days since she had buried Jeremiah, 3 days of an endless, hollow silence broken only by the wind and the frantic thumping of her own pulse. The world outside was a canvas of browns and greys, the vibrant colors of summer bled away, leaving only the skeletal fingers of trees reaching towards an unforgiving sky. She was alone, utterly and terribly alone, a solitary speck in the vast, untamed wilderness that had swallowed her husband and now seemed poised to consume her too. The small store of food was dwindling. The nearest settlement, if one could call it that, was a week's hard journey, a journey she doubted she had the strength or the courage to undertake. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, to twist into menacing shapes, every snap of a twig in the surrounding forest sounded like a footfall. Her fear was a living thing, coiling in her stomach, tightening her throat. She had heard the stories, whispered in hushed, fearful tones around flickering fires back east, tales of savage raids, of brutal, merciless warriors. Cherokee. The word itself was a harbinger of doom in the lexicon of the settlers pushing ever westward, a name synonymous with violence and death. And now, one stood at the edge of the clearing. He had appeared as if from the earth itself, materializing from the dense tree line with a silence that was more terrifying than any war cry. Tall, lean, clad in buckskin, his dark hair long and unbound save for a single feather. His face was unreadable, carved from stone, his eyes black and penetrating, missing nothing. He carried a bow, and a sheathed knife was visible at his hip. Sarah had frozen, the half-chopped piece of wood falling from her numb fingers, the axe clattering uselessly beside it. This was it then. The end she had braced for, the terror that had lurked at the edges of her grief. She thought of Jeremiah's hopeful face when they had first staked their claim, his dreams of a new life, a future. All turned to ash. She closed her eyes, a single tear escaping, tracing a cold path down her dirt-smudged cheek. She would not beg. She would not give him the satisfaction of her terror, though it consumed her. She would meet her fate as Jeremiah would have wanted, with dignity, if not courage. The warrior, Cale, watched her. He saw the tremor in her slight frame, the resignation in the slump of her shoulders, the faint track of the tear. He saw the fresh grave mounded near the pitiful excuse for a garden, the axe lying where it fell, the desperation that clung to this place like the damp mist of morning. His face remained impassive, but his gaze took in every detail, the worn dress, the thinness of her wrists, the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the way she clutched the shawl as if it were her only shield. He had been tracking the deer for 2 days, and its trail had led him unwittingly close to this isolated homestead. He had expected to find a family, perhaps a threat. Instead, he found a lone woman, clearly on the brink. His people were wary, driven from their lands, their trust eroded by broken treaties and the relentless encroachment of the white man. Many among them harbored a deep bitterness, a desire for retribution. But Cale carried his own burdens, his own code. He had seen enough death, enough suffering. He made no move, no sound, simply observed. The silence stretched, taut and heavy, broken only by the wind's relentless sigh. Sarah slowly opened her eyes. He was still there, a statue of impending doom. Why did he wait? The cruelty of it, the suspense, was a torment. She forced herself to stand straighter, to lift her chin, though every instinct screamed at her to flee, to hide, to disappear. But there was nowhere to go. He took a single step forward, then another. Each footfall on the dry leaves was like a hammer blow against her sanity. She could smell the faint, earthy scent of wood smoke and leather that clung to him. He stopped a few paces away, his shadow falling over her. She braced herself. This was the moment. Her life, so recently shattered, was about to be extinguished. She thought of a prayer, but no words came. Only a vast, empty sorrow. He looked at the fallen axe, then at the small pile of unchopped wood. His gaze flickered to the cabin, noting the gaps in the chinking, the general air of neglect that spoke of a recent and overwhelming loss. His eyes returned to hers, and for a fleeting instant, she thought she saw something other than cold indifference in their depths. Pity? No, that was too much to hope for. Perhaps just a flicker of understanding, of shared mortality in this harsh land. He grunted, a low sound in his throat, not menacing, more an acknowledgement. Then, he did the last thing she expected. He bent, picked up the axe, and with a fluid, powerful motion, swung it, cleaving a log in two. Then another, and another. The rhythmic thud of the axe biting into wood filled the clearing, a sound that was suddenly, shockingly normal, a sound of life, of work, of purpose. Sarah stared, dumbfounded, her mind struggling to process the scene. A Cherokee warrior, the embodiment of her deepest fears, was chopping her firewood. The fear did not vanish, but it was joined by a profound, disorienting confusion. What did this mean? Was it a trick? A prelude to some unimaginable horror? He did not look at her, just continued his work, his movements economical and efficient, born of long practice. The pile of chopped wood grew steadily. The sun, weak as it was, caught the sheen of sweat on his brow. He was not a spectre, not a demon from her nightmares. He was a man, strong and capable, performing a simple, mundane task. Yet, nothing about this was simple. Nothing was mundane. Her world had tilted on its axis. She remained frozen, watching him, the shawl clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. The wind still whispered, but now, mixed with its mournful tune, was the steady, reassuring beat of the axe. A sound that, against all logic, against all ingrained terror, began to feel less like a threat and more like a strange, incomprehensible act of something she dared not name. Cale worked until the remaining logs were all split, stacked neatly beside the cabin door, a far more generous pile than she could have managed in a week. He laid the axe carefully against the stack, its blade turned inward. Then, he straightened and finally looked at her again. His expression was still unreadable, but the intensity that had pinned her in place seemed to have lessened, replaced by a kind of weary assessment. Sarah found her voice, though it was barely a whisper, raw and trembling. Why, the word hung in the air between them, small and fragile. She expected no answer, or perhaps a guttural threat. He regarded her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers. Was he looking for fear? For gratitude? She did not know what he saw. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. "Wood is needed," he said, his voice surprisingly low and even, with a faint, unfamiliar cadence. It was not the harsh, barking tone she had imagined. "Wood is needed." Such a simple statement, yet it explained nothing and everything. He had seen a need and addressed it. But why her? Why from him, an enemy? He made no further move, no further explanation. Then, as silently as he had arrived, he turned and walked back towards the tree line. He did not look back. Sarah watched him go, a maelstrom of emotions churning within her. Fear, confusion, a dawning, unbelievable relief, and something else, a tiny, hesitant spark of shame for her instant assumption of savagery. He disappeared into the shadows of the forest, leaving her standing alone once more, but the clearing no longer felt quite so desolate, quite so menacing. The neatly stacked wood was a tangible testament to an act she could not comprehend. She approached it slowly, cautiously, as if it might vanish. She touched the freshly split surface of a log, the wood still cool, smelling faintly of pine. It was real. This had happened. She looked at the grave again. Jeremiah would not have believed it. She barely believed it herself. The encounter replayed in her mind, the silent appearance, the terrifying stillness, the unexpected labor, the terse, almost anticlimactic words. Wood is needed. It was the most profound and unsettling act of charity she had ever witnessed, precisely because of its source. For the rest of that day, Sarah moved in a daze. She brought some of the wood inside, started a fire. The flames crackled cheerfully, a stark contrast to the turmoil in her heart. She ate a little, the first proper food in days, her appetite slowly returning with the abatement of immediate terror. But the questions remained, circling, unanswerable. Why had he helped her? Was he an outcast from his own people? Was this some kind of test? Or was it possible, just possible, that her entire understanding of these people, an understanding built on fear and rumor, was flawed? The sun began to set, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds. She barred the door, a futile gesture if he truly meant her harm, but an old habit that offered a sliver of comfort. She lay down on her cot, but sleep was elusive. The image of the warrior's face, his dark, unreadable eyes, the effortless strength in his arms as he swung the axe, kept replaying. She was no longer braced for death, but she was utterly unprepared for what had happened instead. It had not just been an act of unexpected help, it felt like a crack in the very foundation of her world, a world where lines were clearly drawn, where enemies were enemies, and kindness came only from one's own. The wind still howled outside, but its voice seemed different now, less a lament, more a whisper of the unknown, of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. She was still alone, still grieving, still vulnerable. But something had shifted, irrevocably. A single, inexplicable act of mercy from the hand she had expected to bring her death had planted a seed of doubt, a seed of bewildered wonder, in the barren soil of her despair. And as she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The encounter had been brief, almost silent, yet it had an unnerving power, the power to challenge everything she thought she knew. The boundary between fear and something akin to a terrifying hope had become blurred, indistinct, as mysterious as the forest that surrounded her, and as enigmatic as the man who had walked out of it, chopped her wood, and then vanished, leaving behind only questions and a growing pile of firewood that warmed her chilled body but did little to soothe the disquiet in her soul. She was caught in the space between what she had been taught and what she had witnessed, a chasm of uncertainty that was perhaps more daunting than the simple terror she had felt before. The next morning, Sarah woke with a start, her heart pounding. For a moment, she thought he was there, in the cabin. But it was empty, save for the lingering scent of wood smoke and the dust motes dancing in the thin shafts of sunlight piercing the gloom. The woodpile was still there. It hadn't been a dream. She rose, her limbs stiff, and went to the window. The clearing was empty. The forest stood silent, watchful. She half expected him to reappear, but the day wore on with no sign. A strange restlessness consumed her. She performed her chores mechanically, her mind constantly replaying yesterday's events. The image of Cale's stoic face, the powerful swing of the axe, his quiet departure. What is needed? Why did those simple words echo so profoundly? Was it the sheer incongruity of it all? She found herself looking towards the tree line more often than not, a knot of apprehension and a strange, unfamiliar anticipation in her stomach. He did not come. Days turned into a week. The initial shock began to fade, replaced by a persistent, nagging curiosity. The wood he had chopped dwindled slowly. Sarah found herself rationing it, though there was enough for a while. It felt significant, that wood. More than just fuel. It was a reminder. She ventured a little further from the cabin each day, gathering fallen branches, checking the snares Jeremiah had taught her to set, though she had little luck. The loneliness was a heavy cloak, but it was different now. Before, it had been tinged with pure terror. Now, it was laced with an unsettling sense of wonder, and a growing awareness of her own precariousness, a vulnerability he had seen and, for some reason, not exploited. Then, one crisp afternoon, as she was struggling to haul a bucket of water from the creek, her foot slipped on a mossy rock. She cried out as she fell, the bucket clattering away, water splashing over her. Pain shot through her ankle. She lay there for a moment, breathless, tears of frustration and pain stinging her eyes. It was twisted, probably sprained. Getting back to the cabin would be an agonizing ordeal. Great, she muttered, just great. As she tried to push herself up, a shadow fell over her. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was him. Cale. He stood at the edge of the creek, watching her, his expression as impassive as before. He must have been nearby, perhaps watching her all along. The thought sent a fresh shiver down her spine, though it was not entirely fear this time. He moved towards her, and she instinctively tensed, expecting, she didn't know what. He knelt beside her, his gaze going to her ankle, which was already beginning to swell. He said nothing. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he examined it, his fingers deft and sure. Sarah winced but didn't pull away. There was a strange sort of reassurance in his confident handling. "It is turned," he said, his voice still that low rumble. Not broken, he looked around, his eyes scanning the ground. He picked up a sturdy, straight branch, then drew his knife. Sarah watched, fascinated and wary, as he quickly and skillfully fashioned a crude crutch, stripping away smaller twigs, smoothing the top where it would rest under her arm. He offered it to her. "This will help." She took it, her fingers brushing his. His skin was warm, calloused. "Thank you," she managed, the words feeling inadequate. He retrieved the bucket, refilled it from the creek, and then, before she could protest or even fully comprehend, he stooped and lifted her. One arm went around her back, the other under her knees. She gasped, her hands instinctively going to his shoulders to steady herself. She was acutely aware of his strength, the solid feel of him, the scent of pine and wood smoke again, stronger now. He carried her as if she weighed nothing. The journey back to the cabin was short, but it felt like an eternity. Sarah was mortified, embarrassed, and yet undeniably grateful. Her ankle throbbed, but being carried spared her what would have been an excruciating hobble. He deposited her gently onto her cot inside the cabin. The small space suddenly felt crowded with his presence. He placed the crutch and the bucket of water beside her. "Rest," he commanded softly. "The ankle needs it." He looked around the small, dim interior. His gaze lingered on the empty shelves, the general sparseness. Sarah felt a flush of shame. It was a poor, mean place, especially now. I don't have much," she stammered, feeling the need to explain, though she wasn't sure why. "My husband." "I know," he said, cutting her off, but not unkindly. His eyes held a flicker of something she couldn't name. He had seen the grave. Of course, he knew. He turned to leave. "Wait," she said, a sudden impulse. "Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me?" It was the same question as before, but this time, it felt more urgent, more vital. He paused at the doorway, his back to her. The light from outside silhouetted his frame. For a long moment, he was silent. She thought he wouldn't answer. Then, he spoke, his voice so low she almost missed it. "Once, I was helped when I did not expect it." He didn't elaborate. He didn't turn around. He simply stepped out of the cabin and was gone. Sarah lay there, her ankle throbbing, her mind racing. "Once, I was helped when I did not expect it." The words resonated deep within her, offering a glimpse, just a tiny sliver, of the man behind the stoic facade. It wasn't an answer that explained everything, but it was something. It was a human reason. It hinted at a past, at experiences that had shaped him, perhaps even a vulnerability he himself had once known. The act of chopping wood had been inexplicable. This, carrying her, tending to her injury, felt different. More personal. He had touched her, shown a direct, almost tender concern. Her fear of him was receding, slowly, hesitantly, being replaced by a complex tapestry of gratitude, bewilderment, and a growing, undeniable respect. He was not the savage of her imagination. He was something else entirely. Something that challenged all her preconceived notions, all the ingrained prejudices of her world. And as she lay there, the crutch he had made leaning against the wall, a tangible symbol of his aid, she realized that the change he was bringing to her life was far more profound than just ensuring her immediate survival. He was forcing her to see, to question, to perhaps even understand a world beyond the narrow confines of her own experience. The wilderness outside suddenly felt less like a threat and more like a place of unexpected encounters, of mysterious connections. And the man named Cale was at the very heart of that mystery. Cale returned the next day, not with firewood this time, but with 2 rabbits, cleaned and ready for the pot. He left them on the stoop without a word and was gone before Sarah, hobbling on her crutch, could reach the door. The offering was unambiguous: food. Survival. She cooked one of the rabbits, the aroma filling the small cabin, a welcome change from the meager fare she had been subsisting on. Her ankle was still painful, but his poultice of crushed leaves, which he had silently applied before leaving the previous day after checking her ankle again, seemed to be helping with the swelling. His visits became a pattern. Sometimes he brought game, sometimes herbs she recognized as medicinal. He never stayed long, rarely spoke more than a few necessary words. He would check her ankle, perhaps adjust the rough bandage he had fashioned, his touch always firm but gentle. He repaired a loose shutter, patched a hole in the roof that Jeremiah hadn't gotten to. Small things, practical things, all done with that same quiet efficiency. Sarah began to anticipate his arrivals, a strange mixture of anxiety and something akin to, not quite comfort, but a lessening of the crushing loneliness. She started leaving a small portion of cooked food for him by the door, a silent offering of her own. Sometimes it was gone when she next looked, sometimes it remained untouched. She never saw him take it. Their communication was sparse, almost entirely nonverbal. A nod, a glance, a gesture. Yet, a fragile understanding seemed to be growing between them, a silent acknowledgement of their shared space, their unusual, unspoken arrangement. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture, the almost imperceptible changes in his expression. A slight narrowing of his eyes meant he was assessing something, a tightening of his jaw might indicate disapproval or concern. He, in turn, seemed to understand her unspoken needs, her limitations with the injured ankle. One afternoon, he found her struggling to mend a tear in Jeremiah's old hunting shirt, her stitches clumsy, her fingers fumbling. He watched her for a moment, then silently took the shirt and needle from her. Sarah was about to protest, surprised, but he was already working, his large, calloused hand surprisingly nimble. His stitches were small, neat, and strong. Far better than hers. She watched him, fascinated. "Where did you learn to sew like that?" she asked, her curiosity overriding her reticence. He didn't look up from his task. "A warrior must mend his own gear," he said simply. And sometimes, the gear of others, less skilled, a faint, almost invisible hint of a smile touched the corner of his lips. It was so fleeting she almost missed it, but it sent a strange warmth through her. It was the closest thing to humor he had ever displayed. When he finished, he handed the shirt back to her. The mend was perfect. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "It was my husband's favorite," he nodded, his expression unreadable again. "Loss is a heavy burden," he said, his gaze distant for a moment, as if looking at something far away, or long ago. The words, quiet and unexpected, struck a chord deep within her. He understood. He wasn't just a stoic, capable presence, he knew grief. The shared hardship of survival in this unforgiving land was slowly, painstakingly, eroding the barriers between them. She was still a white woman, a settler, an intruder in his world. He was still a Cherokee warrior, an other in hers. But in the small, shared space of her isolated cabin, these labels were beginning to lose their sharp edges. They were two people, bound by circumstance, by unspoken needs, by a series of quiet, inexplicable acts of kindness. The threat of starvation, of the harsh elements, of utter solitude, these were the immediate antagonists. And in facing them, a reluctant, almost invisible alliance was being forged. She began to learn his ways, the rhythm of his appearances and disappearances. She noticed he always approached from a different direction, never made a sound until he was already there. He moved like a phantom, a part of the forest itself. Sometimes, she would leave out a cup of cooled berry tea, or a piece of cornbread if she had managed to grind some meal. It was her way of acknowledging his efforts, of participating in this strange, silent exchange. She never knew if he partook, but the offerings were always gone. The trust between them was not spoken, not defined. It was simply there, growing in the silences, in the shared glances, in the mutual acts of survival. It was a fragile thing, easily broken, she knew. The world outside her small clearing was still full of danger, of prejudice, of violence. But within these few acres, something extraordinary was happening. A connection was forming where only fear and animosity should have existed. She was less afraid now. Her ankle was healing, her strength slowly returning. She was becoming accustomed to his presence, to the reassuring knowledge that he was out there, a silent guardian. She still didn't understand him, not fully. His motives remained largely a mystery. But she was beginning to see the man, not just the warrior. The man who had known loss, who understood burdens, who helped without expecting thanks, simply because, as he had said, what was needed, or because, once, he too had been helped. These small revelations were like glimmers of light in a vast darkness, illuminating a path she had never imagined taking. And with each passing day, with each quiet act of support, Sarah felt herself changing, the hard shell of her grief and fear slowly cracking, allowing a tentative, hesitant hope to take root. The wilderness was still wild, but it no longer felt entirely hostile. It held, within its depths, the capacity for unexpected grace. As autumn deepened, bringing with it a sharper bite to the air and the threat of early snows, Sarah's ankle healed enough for her to walk without the crutch, albeit with a slight limp. She resumed more of her own chores, determined not to be entirely dependent on Cale's silent provisions. She mended the cabin more thoroughly, using skills Jeremiah had taught her, her hands growing calloused, her body leaner and stronger. She learned to read the signs of the weather, the behavior of the animals, small lessons in survival gleaned from observation and necessity. Cale continued to appear, less frequently now perhaps, but his presence was a constant, like the mountains on the horizon. One day, he arrived to find her practicing with Jeremiah's old rifle. It was heavy, unwieldy, and her aim was terrible. She missed the knot on the tree she was aiming for by a wide margin, the shot echoing through the quiet woods. She flushed with embarrassment as she saw him standing at the edge of the clearing, watching her, his arms crossed. She expected a grunt of disapproval, or perhaps that fleeting, almost smile of amusement. Instead, he walked over, took the rifle from her gently, and checked the load. "You hold it too tight," he said. "Let it breathe with you." He raised the rifle, his stance relaxed yet firm, sighted, and fired. The bullet struck the not dead center. Sarah stared. "How?" "Many years of practice," he said, handing the rifle back and a clear eye. "You look, but you do not see for the next hour," he instructed her. His teaching was like everything else about him, patient, precise, with no wasted words. He corrected her stance, her grip, the way she sighted. "Feel the balance," he told her. Become part of it. Slowly, her aim improved. She began to hit the tree, then closer to the knot. A small thrill of accomplishment coursed through her. It wasn't just about hitting a target, it was about control, about capability, about not being entirely helpless. "Better," he grunted, when she finally managed to clip the edge of the knot. It was high praise, coming from him. "Thank you," she said, genuinely grateful. I need to be able to protect myself." His dark eyes met hers, and there was something in them, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even approval. "It is wise," he said. "The world does not offer safety freely." That evening, as she cleaned the rifle, she thought about his words. The world does not offer safety freely. He knew that truth intimately, she suspected. His life, the life of his people, was a testament to it. Her own recent experiences had been a harsh lesson in the same vein. The more she learned from him, or simply in his presence, the more the chasm between their perceived worlds seemed to shrink. She began to see the forest not just as a collection of trees, but as a larder, an apothecary, a shelter. He taught her, sometimes with a word, sometimes by simply leaving a plant on her doorstep with a gesture towards its use, which plants were edible, which had healing properties, how to track small game more effectively. She learned to identify the call of different birds, the meaning of a broken twig on a path. Her senses sharpened. She became more attuned to the subtle rhythms of the wilderness. One afternoon, while she was gathering firewood deeper in the woods than usual, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the distinct, guttural growl of a wolf, and then another. She froze, terror gripping her. She had Jeremiah's rifle, but they were close, too close. Before she could even raise the weapon, an arrow hissed past her, thudding into the chest of a lean, grey wolf that had been slinking through the undergrowth, its eyes fixed on her. Another arrow followed, dropping a second wolf. Cale materialized from the trees, bow still taut, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He moved with lethal grace, a predator himself, but one who had just saved her. The immediate danger passed. He lowered his bow, his expression grim. "They are hungry," he said. "The deer are scarce this season. They hunt closer to the edges." Sarah was trembling, her earlier confidence shattered. I didn't see them. They are masters of silence," he replied, retrieving his arrows. He looked at her, his gaze lingering on her pale face. "You must be more aware. Your thoughts wander." It was a criticism, but not a harsh one. More a statement of fact. "I will be," she promised, her voice shaky. He nodded. "Come. It is not safe for you here alone." He escorted her back to the cabin, his presence a silent shield. The incident shook her, but it also solidified something. He had protected her, risked himself for her, though he never would have turned it as such. His actions spoke louder than any words of reassurance. That night, a new kind of threat arrived. Not wolves, but men. She heard them first, loud voices, rough laughter, the jingle of harnesses. 3 riders, white men, trappers by their look, emerged into the clearing. They were coarse, weather-beaten, their eyes hard. "Well now, what have we here?" one of them called out, his gaze lingering on Sarah in a way that made her skin crawl. A pretty little flower all alone in the wilderness. Sarah's heart pounded. She gripped the rifle tighter. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just some hospitality," another one said with a leering grin. "Maybe some hot food, a warm place to rest for the night." "I don't have much to spare," she said, standing her ground in the doorway. "We ain't asking for much," the first one said, dismounting. "And we ain't accustomed to being told no." They were advancing on the cabin. This was a different kind of fear, uglier, more personal than the wolves. These men were not driven by simple hunger, but by something baser. She raised the rifle. "Stay back," she warned. They laughed. "Feisty, ain't she?" Just as the first man reached the steps of the cabin, an arrow sprouted from his shoulder. He screamed, stumbling back. The other 2 froze, looking around wildly. Cale stepped out from the shadows of the trees, another arrow narked, his face a mask of cold fury. She said to stay back, his voice was low, deadly. "You did not listen." The remaining 2 trappers stared, their bravado evaporating. A Cherokee warrior, appearing as if from nowhere, his aim proven. "We don't want no trouble, Injun," one of them stammered, his hands raised. "Then leave," Cale commanded. "And do not return to this place." The 2 men scrambled to help their wounded companion onto his horse, their eyes darting nervously between Cale and the dark forest. They mounted quickly and galloped away, disappearing into the night. Cale watched them go, his stance unwavering until they were long gone. Then he lowered his bow and turned to Sarah. She was trembling, the rifle heavy in her hands. "Are you harmed?" he asked, his voice losing some of its harsh edge. She shook her head, unable to speak. He stepped closer, his gaze searching. "They will not return tonight," he said. "But others like them may come." The implication was clear. Her solitude, which had once been her greatest fear, was now also her greatest vulnerability to a different kind of predator. He stayed that night, not in the cabin, but outside, a silent sentinel melting into the shadows near the tree line. Sarah didn't argue. His presence, which had once terrified her, was now the only thing that made her feel safe. She lay on her cot, listening to the sounds of the night, profoundly aware of the man keeping watch. He had not just saved her from wolves and from wicked men. He was teaching her, protecting her, changing her. The boundaries of her world were not just cracking, they were crumbling. And in their place, something new, something unknown but undeniably powerful, was being built, one silent act, one shared danger, one quiet moment of understanding at a time. She was no longer just Sarah, the grieving widow. She was becoming someone else, someone stronger, more aware, someone who had seen beyond the veil of prejudice and fear, thanks to the unexpected intervention of a man she should have considered her mortal enemy. The irony was not lost on her. The incident with the trappers left a lingering unease. It was a stark reminder that the tentative peace Sarah had found in her small clearing was fragile, easily shattered by the encroachments of the outside world. Cale's presence became more consistent in the following days, though he still maintained his distance, often unseen but felt. He would appear to help her secure the cabin further, strengthening the door, reinforcing the shutters. His actions were pragmatic, driven by a clear assessment of the increased risk. He taught her more about tracking, not just for game, but for human sign, how to spot disturbances in the forest that might indicate someone had passed through. "You must learn to see what is not said, what is not shown," he told her, his dark eyes serious. "The forest speaks. Men also speak, even in their silence." In their tracks, Sarah absorbed his lessons with a new urgency. She was no longer merely a recipient of his aid, she was becoming an active participant in her own defense, her own survival. Her fear was still present, but it was now tempered with a growing resolve, a determination not to be a victim. One evening, as a cold rain lashed against the cabin, he appeared at her door, soaked and silent. It was unusual for him to seek shelter so directly. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping aside. "Come in," she said, her voice quiet. He entered, bringing with him the scent of rain and damp earth. The small cabin felt even smaller with his presence, yet not uncomfortably so. He stood by the hearth, the firelight flickering on his stoic face, casting long shadows. "The stream is rising fast," he said, his first words. "The old beaver dam upstream may not hold if this rain continues." Sarah's heart sank. Her cabin was not far from the stream. If the dam broke, it could flood. "What can we do?" she asked, looking to him for guidance. "We must check the dam at first light," he replied. "If it is weak, we may be able to reinforce it, or divert some of the water." There was no I in his statement, only we. The unspoken partnership was solidifying, forged in shared necessity. That night, he did not leave. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall, a blanket she offered draped over his shoulders. He did not sleep, or if he did, it was with an alertness that never seemed to leave him. Sarah lay on her cot, acutely aware of him, yet a strange sense of security settled over her. The storm raged outside, but within the cabin, there was a quiet stillness, a shared vigil. In the grey, wet dawn, they set out for the beaver dam. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, but the stream was a raging torrent, brown and swollen. The air was heavy with the roar of water. The dam, a complex structure of logs and mud, was visibly strained, water pouring over the top in several places. "It is bad," Cale said, his expression grim. "We must work quickly for hours," they labored, side by side. Cale, with his superior strength and knowledge of the woods, directed their efforts, showing her where to place rocks and logs to reinforce weak spots, how to dig shallow channels to redirect some of the flow. Sarah worked tirelessly, her muscles aching, her hands raw, driven by a desperate energy. She hauled rocks, dragged branches, packed mud into crevices, following his terse instructions. There was no time for conversation, only for focused, demanding work. They were soaked, muddy, and exhausted, but they kept going, a silent team battling the relentless power of the water. Slowly, painstakingly, their efforts began to make a difference. The overflow lessened. The strain on the main structure seemed to ease. By midday, the immediate crisis appeared to be averted, though the stream remained dangerously high. They stood on the bank, looking at their handiwork, both breathing heavily. Sarah felt a surge of pride, of accomplishment, mixed with her exhaustion. They had done it, together. "It will hold, for now," Cale said, his voice rough with fatigue. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw genuine approval in his eyes, perhaps even a touch of respect. "You work hard. You have strength." Coming from him, it was a profound compliment. "I learned from a good teacher," she replied, a small, tired smile touching her lips. A comfortable silence fell between them, the roar of the receding water the only sound. In that moment, standing beside him, covered in mud, her body aching, she felt a connection that transcended words, transcended their different worlds. It was the bond of shared struggle, of mutual reliance. As they walked back towards the cabin, the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting a watery light on the sodden landscape. "Why did you stay?" Sarah asked quietly, thinking of the previous night, of his vigil in her cabin. "Not just for the dam. You could have gone to your own shelter." Cale was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost introspective. "My people have a story," he began, "about the lone wolf. It is strong, it is cunning, it survives. But even the lone wolf sometimes finds its path crossing another's in the deep of winter. Sometimes, warmth is found in shared shelter, not just in solitude." He paused. "I have been a lone wolf for many seasons." His words were a revelation, a rare glimpse into his inner world, his solitude, perhaps even his loneliness. He saw himself as an outcast, or at least apart. It explained so much: his solitary existence, his willingness to help someone outside his own tribe, his often guarded demeanor. "What happened?" she asked gently, sensing there was more to his story, the reason for his solitary path. He stopped, turning to face her. The weariness was still on him, but his eyes were clear, holding a deep, ancient sorrow. "I spoke out against a raid, a senseless attack on a peaceful settlement. It was a time of much anger, much pain for my people. My words were not welcome. I was told I no longer understood the heart of a warrior, that my path was not their path, so you left. I was encouraged to walk my own trail," he said, a wry, bitter twist to his lips. "Some called it exile. I called it choosing to live by my own code, even if it meant living alone." Sarah looked at him, seeing not just the capable protector, but a man of principle, a man who had suffered for his convictions. Her respect for him deepened immeasurably. "Your code, it led you here, to help me," she said, understanding dawning. "I did not plan it," he admitted. "But when I saw you, alone, like a fawn separated from its mother, my path crossed yours." The lone wolf found another who needed shelter from the storm. He looked away, towards the mountains, a wistful expression on his face. Perhaps it is not always a weakness to seek warmth, even for a lone wolf. The admission hung in the air, profoundly personal, deeply moving. He had shared a piece of his soul with her, a confidence that bridged the gap between them more effectively than any shared labor. She understood now, or at least began to. His actions were not random acts of kindness, they were the choices of a man living by a deeply held moral compass, a man who, despite his own pain and isolation, had not allowed his heart to harden completely. The rain had stopped, and the world felt washed clean, new. So too, did their relationship. The unspoken had become spoken. The stoic protector had revealed a glimpse of his vulnerability, his past. And in doing so, he had given Sarah a gift far greater than safety or survival. He had given her understanding, and with it, a profound and lasting connection. The lone wolf was, perhaps, no longer quite so alone. And neither was she. The revelation of Cale's past, his self-imposed exile born from a moral stand, resonated deeply with Sarah. It painted his actions in a new light, transforming him from an enigmatic benefactor into a figure of quiet, principled strength. His solitude was not a rejection of connection, but a consequence of his integrity. This understanding fostered a new level of comfort between them, a subtle easing of the unspoken tensions that had always lingered. She found herself talking to him more, sharing small details of her life with Jeremiah, her dreams that had turned to dust, her fears for the future. He listened patiently, his silence no longer intimidating but receptive. He rarely offered advice, but his presence was a balm, his occasional, insightful comments revealing a wisdom that went beyond his years. "Jeremiah always said this land would test us," she recalled one evening, staring into the fire. "He believed it would make us stronger, or break us." Cale nodded slowly. "The land demands truth," he said. "From the soil, from the creatures, from those who walk upon it. It strips away what is false." His words made her reflect on her own transformation. She was undeniably stronger, more resilient than the terrified widow he had first encountered. The land, and his presence, had indeed stripped away much of her former self, her naive assumptions, her crippling fear. What was emerging was someone new, someone she was still getting to know. One day, a small party of Cherokee hunters passed near the clearing. Sarah tensed, her hand instinctively going to the rifle that was now always close by. But Cale, who had been showing her how to read the age of deer tracks, simply straightened and watched them approach. They were younger men, their faces hard, their eyes suspicious as they took in the cabin, and then Sarah. They spoke to Cale in their own tongue, their voices sharp, questioning. Cale's replies were calm, measured, but firm. Sarah could not understand the words, but she could read the tension in their stances, the disapproval in their glances towards her. After a few minutes, they moved on, casting lingering, hostile looks over their shoulders. When they were gone, Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "They do not approve of you being here," she said, stating the obvious. "Or of you helping me. Some carry much bitterness," Cale said, his expression unreadable. "They see only the color of your skin, the memory of past wrongs. They do not see the woman who works to survive, who shows respect for the land and you," she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you see?" He turned to look at her fully, his dark eyes holding hers. The wind rustled the autumn leaves around them, a soft, sighing sound. "I see a heart that has known sorrow but has not been consumed by it," he said, his voice low and steady. "I see hands that have learned to labor, and a spirit that refuses to break. I see," Sarah, just her name. But the way he said it, the simple, direct acknowledgement, made her feel truly seen, perhaps for the first time since Jeremiah's death. Not as a settler, not as a widow, not as a burden, but as herself. It was a powerful moment, an affirmation that transcended their different backgrounds, their complicated circumstances. His acceptance, his ability to see beyond the superficial labels, was a profound gift. It also highlighted the precariousness of his own position. Helping her, associating with her, clearly put him at odds with some of his own people. His path as a lone wolf was not without its ongoing challenges. A few days later, this was driven home more forcefully. An older Cherokee man, clearly a figure of authority, accompanied by two stern-faced warriors, arrived at the clearing. This was no chance encounter. They had come for Cale. The older man, whose name was Tyan, regarded Sarah with cold, appraising eyes before turning his full attention to Cale. Their conversation was longer this time, more intense. Tyan's voice was deep, resonant, carrying the weight of authority, sometimes rising in anger or admonishment. Cale remained mostly calm, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight set of his jaw. She understood enough to know that Tyan was questioning Cale's loyalty, his judgment, his continued presence near her settlement. At one point, Tyan gestured towards her, his words sharp and accusatory. Cale responded, his voice firm, unyielding. There was a long, charged silence. Finally, Tyan spoke again, his tone one of finality. He and the other two warriors then turned and left, their disapproval a palpable force in the air. Cale stood watching them go, his back to Sarah. When he finally turned, his face was etched with a deep weariness, and something else, a profound sadness. "What did they want?" Sarah asked, her heart heavy with apprehension. "They believe I have forgotten who I am," Cale said, his voice flat. "That I have allied myself with those who have taken our lands, wronged our people, and what did you tell them?" "I told them I help where help is needed, that a person in distress has no color, no tribe, only need." He looked at her, his eyes troubled. "They do not understand. They say I must choose. Return to the people, and forsake this. Or remain an outcast, a traitor to my blood." The ultimatum hung heavy in the air. Sarah felt a pang of guilt, of responsibility. His association with her was costing him dearly. "Cale," she began, "you don't have to, if this is causing you such trouble." "It is my choice, Sarah," he interrupted, his voice regaining some of its strength. "I walked away from their path once because it was not mine. I will not be forced onto it now by threats or accusations." But she could see the toll it was taking on him. The conflict with his own people, the accusation of betrayal, these were wounds far deeper than any physical injury. "This place," he said, gesturing vaguely to the cabin, the small clearing, "it has become something. Not just a shelter for you. Perhaps for me as well it was a startling admission. This isolated patch of land, which had been the site of her deepest grief and fear, had somehow, through their shared struggles and his unwavering presence, become a sanctuary of sorts for both of them. A place where the rigid lines of their respective worlds blurred, where two solitary souls had found an unlikely connection. That night, as she lay awake, listening to the familiar sounds of the forest, she knew that their intertwined fate was reaching a critical juncture. The external world, with its prejudices and conflicts, was pressing in on them. The antagonistic force was no longer just the harshness of nature or random marauders, it was the disapproval of his tribe, the ingrained animosity between their peoples. And Cale was caught in the middle, his loyalty and his principles on a collision course. She realized that her own transformation was not just about survival, it was about understanding, empathy, and the courage to stand by what felt right, even when it was difficult. Cale had taught her that, not through words, but through his actions, through his unwavering commitment to his own moral code. And now, perhaps, it was her turn to offer him something in return, though she did not yet know what that could be. All she knew was that the bond between them, forged in silence and shared hardship, had become too strong to easily break, for either of them. The tension following Tyan's visit was palpable. Cale became more withdrawn, his usual quietness now tinged with a brooding introspection. He still came to the clearing, still ensured Sarah's safety and well-being, but there was a new wariness in his eyes, a constant scanning of the tree line that spoke of an anticipated threat. Sarah, in turn, found herself more vigilant, not just for her own sake, but for his. She knew his choice to defy Tyan's ultimatum would have consequences. The antagonistic force was no longer an abstract concept, it had a face, a name, and the weight of a community behind it. One morning, Sarah found a small, intricately carved wooden bird on her doorstep. It was beautiful, delicate, clearly the work of skilled hands. It was not Cale's style, his craftsmanship was practical, strong. She looked towards the forest, a sense of unease prickling her skin. Was it a gift? A warning? Later that day, Cale appeared, his expression grimmer than usual. "You found the carving?" he asked without preamble. Sarah nodded. "What does it mean?" "It is a message," he said. "From Elara, Tyan's daughter. She and we were once close. She does not agree with her father's harshness. The bird is a symbol of peace, of a desire for understanding. But it is also a warning. Tyan is angry. He feels his authority has been challenged. He is speaking with other clan leaders. Some are urging him to make an example of me, to show that defiance will not be tolerated, especially not for a white woman." Sarah's blood ran cold. "An example? What does that mean?" "It means they may try to take me by force," Cale said, his voice flat. Or worse, the unspoken threat hung heavy between them. Sarah felt a surge of fear, not for herself this time, but for him. He was risking everything, his freedom, his life, because of her, because of his refusal to abandon his principles. "You cannot stay here, Cale," she said, her voice urgent. "It's too dangerous for you. You have to leave, go somewhere they can't find you." He looked at her, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "And where would that be, Sarah? This is my land, as much as it is theirs. I have run once from a fight I believed was wrong. I will not run from this one, not when my choice is clear, but they will kill you." "Perhaps," he conceded, his gaze unwavering. "But to yield to injustice, to abandon someone I have offered protection to, that would be a death of a different kind. A death of the spirit. I would rather face their anger than live as a coward." His words, filled with a quiet, unshakable resolve, silenced her protests. She understood his stance, admired his courage, even as it terrified her. He was a man who would not compromise his core beliefs, no matter the cost. In the days that followed, the atmosphere around the cabin grew thick with suspense. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent Sarah's heart racing. Cale spent more time in the forest, scouting, observing, always alert. He taught Sarah how to create diversions, how to hide her tracks, what to do if they were attacked. He was preparing her for the worst, and the unspoken reality of their situation settled like a stone in her stomach. One evening, as dusk was settling, casting long, eerie shadows, he returned to the cabin, his face grim. "They are coming," he said, his voice low. "I saw their sign. At least 5, maybe more. Tyan is with them. They will be here by morning." Sarah's hands trembled. "What will we do?" "We have 2 choices," Cale said, his eyes meeting hers, serious and direct. "We can try to flee, but they are skilled trackers, and I am one man. They would likely run us down. Or, we can make a stand here." Sarah looked around the small, familiar cabin. It had been her prison, then her sanctuary. Now, it might become a battleground. "Here? It is defensible, to a degree," Cale said. "They will not expect us to fight. They expect me to surrender, or to be taken easily. Surprise may be our only advantage." Sarah thought of the fear she had lived with for so long. Fear of starvation, fear of the wilderness, fear of this very confrontation. But something had changed within her. Cale's quiet strength, his unwavering principles, had kindled a spark of courage in her own heart. She was no longer the helpless widow. "I will not run," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "If you fight, I fight with you." Cale looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, quickly replaced by a deep, solemn respect. "Your path has truly changed, Sarah," he said softly. "You are no longer the woman I first found in this clearing. You changed me, Cale," she replied, meeting his gaze. "You taught me how to survive, how to be strong, how to see beyond fear." They spent the night preparing, barricading the single window, reinforcing the door. Cale checked his bow, his arrows, the knife at his belt. Sarah loaded Jeremiah's rifle, her hand steady now, her movements practiced. There was little talk. The silence was filled with a grim determination, a shared purpose. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with streaks of gray and pale pink, a tense quiet descended. They took their positions, Cale by the narrow opening he had left in the window barricade, Sarah near the door, the rifle resting on a makeshift support. The forest outside was unnervingly still. Then, they appeared. Tyan, at the head of a group of 6 warriors, emerged from the tree line, moving with a grim, purposeful silence. They spread out, forming a loose semicircle around the cabin. Tyan stepped forward. "Cale," his voice boomed, echoing in the still morning air. "You are an outcast. You defy the council. You shelter the enemy. Come out. Face your judgment." Cale did not reply. He remained still, watchful. "Do not make us take you, Cale," Tyan shouted, his voice laced with anger. "It will only end badly for you, and for the woman." Sarah's heart pounded, but she held her position, her finger near the trigger. She glanced at Cale. His face was a mask of concentration, his eyes narrowed, focused. This was it. The culmination of all their struggles, all their fears. The climactic confrontation that would test their bond, their ideals, and their very will to survive. She took a deep breath, her gaze steady. She was ready. She would not let Cale face this alone. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The fate of the lone wolf, and the woman he had chosen to protect, hung precariously in the balance as the morning sun cast its first, cold rays upon the besieged cabin. Tyan waited, his patience wearing thin. The silence from the cabin was an affront, a defiance he could not tolerate. "So be it," he growled, then gave a sharp command to his warriors. 2 of them moved forward, shields raised, heading for the door. Cale narked an arrow, his movements fluid and economical. "Aim for their legs, Sarah," he murmured, not taking his eyes off the advancing men. "We do not wish to kill, only to stop them. But do not hesitate if your life is threatened." The first arrow hissed from Cale's bow, striking one of the warriors in the thigh. The man cried out, stumbling, his shield clattering to the ground. The second warrior hesitated, momentarily exposed. Sarah sighted, squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the explosion deafening in the tense quiet. Her shot went wide, kicking up dirt near the warrior's feet, but it had its effect. He scrambled back, seeking cover. "Good," Cale grunted. "They know we will fight." Tyan's face was dark with fury. "They resist," he roared. "Bring them down." Arrows rained down on the cabin, thudding into the log walls, a few splintering the barricaded window. Cale loosed another arrow, forcing another warrior to duck behind a tree. The air filled with the sounds of conflict, the twang of bowstrings, the crack of the rifle, the shouts of the attackers, the dull impact of arrows. Sarah reloaded, her hands moving with a practiced urgency she wouldn't have thought possible weeks ago. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but a strange calmness had settled over her mind. She was focused, her senses heightened. She fired again, this time hitting the edge of a shield, making the warrior behind it flinch. Cale moved with deadly precision, his arrows finding their marks, wounding but not killing, aiming to incapacitate. He was a whirlwind of controlled motion, his face grim, his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective light. But they were outnumbered. The warriors pressed their attack, using the trees for cover, trying to find a weakness in the cabin's defenses. One warrior, bolder than the rest, made a dash for the window, trying to pry loose the barricade. Cale whirled, his bow coming up, but another warrior seized the distraction, rushing the door. Sarah turned, the rifle swinging. She didn't have time to aim properly. She fired from the hip. The bullet struck the warrior in the shoulder, spinning him around, but his momentum carried him forward. He slammed into the door, which groaned under the impact. Cale was there instantly, his knife flashing. The warrior recoiled with a cry, clutching a wounded arm, and fell back. Outside, Tyan bellowed in frustration. "He fights like a cornered animal. He has forgotten all honor." "It is you who have forgotten honor, Tyan," Cale shouted back, his voice ringing with conviction. "To attack a lone man and a woman who have done you no harm. Is this the way of the Cherokee?" His words seemed to give Tyan pause, if only for a moment. But the pause was short-lived. Another volley of arrows struck the cabin. One splintered the wood near Sarah's head, and she ducked instinctively. The fight raged on, a desperate, brutal struggle for survival. Sarah lost track of time. Her shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil, her ears rang, the smell of gunpowder and sweat filled the small space. She saw Cale take a glancing blow from an arrow to his arm, wincing but not faltering. He broke off the shaft, his face tight with pain, and continued to fight. She felt a surge of desperate anger. These men, his own people, were trying to kill him, all because he had shown her kindness, because he lived by his own moral code. It was senseless, brutal. Then, she saw her chance. Tyan, directing his warriors, had moved slightly forward, momentarily less cautious. Sarah took careful aim. Her target wasn't Tyan himself, but the ground just in front of him. She fired. The bullet kicked up a spray of dirt and pebbles, making Tyan jump back, startled. "Enough!" she screamed, her voice raw, desperate. "Leave us be! He has done nothing to deserve this." Her cry, unexpected and impassioned, seemed to momentarily stun the attackers. Tyan stared at her, his face a mixture of anger and surprise. In that brief lull, Cale spoke, his voice carrying over the clearing, though strained. "Tyan! Is this what we have become? Hunting our own? Spilling blood over perceived insults, while the true enemy chips away at our lands, our people, our spirit." He gestured towards Sarah. "This woman, she has lost everything. I offered her protection, as any honorable man would. Would you have had me leave her to die, or to fall prey to those who truly wish us harm?" There was a long, heavy silence. The warriors looked uncertainly at Tyan, then at Cale. His words, spoken with such raw conviction, seemed to hang in the air, challenging their actions, their motives. Tyan's face was a mask of conflicting emotions. Anger, pride, doubt. He looked at his wounded men, at the defiant stance of Cale, at the determined, tear-streaked face of the white woman who stood beside him. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension in the clearing began to shift. One of the younger warriors lowered his bow slightly. "Ilara," Tyan's daughter, who had warned Kale, suddenly stepped out from the trees where she had been watching, hidden. "Father," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Kale speaks the truth. There has been enough bitterness, enough fighting amongst ourselves. He has broken no sacred law. He has shown compassion. Is that now a crime among our people?" Tyan looked at his daughter, his expression unreadable. Her intervention, her public siding with Kale, was a significant challenge to his authority. He was an old warrior, steeped in tradition, but he was not a fool. He could see the doubt in his men's eyes, he could feel the tide turning. The fire of the attack was sputtering out. He looked at Kale one last time, a long, hard look. Then, with a deep sigh that seemed to carry the weight of ages, he lowered his hand. "Enough," he said, his voice weary. "The fight is over." He turned to his men. "Tend to the wounded." "We are leaving." The warriors slowly, hesitantly, began to withdraw, helping their injured comrades. Tyan did not look at Kale or Sarah again. He turned his back and walked away, his shoulders slumped, a figure of defeated pride. Ilara gave Kale a small, almost imperceptible nod before following her father. As the last of the attackers disappeared into the trees, an overwhelming silence descended upon the clearing, broken only by Sarah's ragged breathing and the distant call of a bird. It was over. They had survived. Kale leaned heavily against the wall, the tension draining from him, leaving him pale and exhausted. His wounded arm was bleeding freely. Sarah rushed to his side. "Kale, you're hurt." "It is nothing," he said, but his voice lacked its usual strength. She gently examined the wound, a deep gash along his forearm. "We need to clean this, bind it together," they managed. Sarah tore strips from her petticoat, her hands trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. He bore the pain of her ministrations with his usual stoicism, but she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. When it was done, they sat in silence for a long time, the small cabin bearing the scars of the battle, splintered wood, arrow-pocked walls. The reality of what they had just been through, what they had faced together, began to sink in. "Thank you, Sarah," Kale said finally, his voice soft. "You fought bravely. You stood with me." "You taught me how," she replied, meeting his gaze. "And you were right. It is better to fight for what you believe in than to live in fear." A faint smile touched his lips. It seems the lone wolf found a companion with the heart of a lioness. The words warmed her, despite the chill of the aftermath. They had faced the worst, and their bond, already strong, had been tempered in the crucible of conflict, emerging unbreakable. The cost had been high. Kale was wounded, his relationship with his tribe fractured, perhaps irreparably. But they had stood their ground, and in doing so, they had affirmed their own truths, their own unlikely, powerful connection. The days following the attack were quiet, almost unnervingly so. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Kale recovered slowly from his wound, his strength gradually returning, though a deep weariness clung to him. Sarah tended to him with a gentle solicitude, cleaning and dressing his arm, ensuring he ate and rested. The roles had subtly shifted. She was now, in part, the caregiver, the protector of his recuperation. They spoke little of the fight, the memory still too raw, too close. But it lay between them, an unspoken testament to what they had endured and overcome together. Tyan and his warriors did not return. Ilara, however, came one afternoon, alone and unarmed. She approached the cabin cautiously, her eye seeking Kale. He met her at the edge of the clearing. Their conversation was quiet, earnest. Sarah watched from the doorway, sensing the importance of the exchange. When Ilara left, there was a new lightness in Kale's demeanor, a subtle easing of the tension he had carried for so long. "What did she say?" Sarah asked when he returned. "Tyan is reflecting," Kale said. "Ilara speaks for many of the younger generation who are tired of the old hatreds, the endless cycle of retaliation. She said my stand, and yours," he added, looking at Sarah, "has made some of them question. They saw not an enemy, but a man defending his principles, and a woman of courage." He paused. "She said Tyan will not trouble us again. He has withdrawn his condemnation, though he has not offered friendship. It is a truce." An uneasy peace. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was not a full reconciliation, but it was more than she had dared to hope for. Cale would no longer be hunted by his own people. "That's good news, Cale," she said softly. "Truly good," he nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Perhaps," he said, "even a stone dropped in a still pond can create ripples that spread far." Their life settled into a new rhythm, one marked by a deeper, more comfortable companionship. The shared trauma had stripped away the last vestiges of formality or reservation between them. They worked together, shared meals, and in the long autumn evenings, sometimes sat by the fire, the silence companionable, occasionally broken by quiet conversation. Cale taught her more about the Cherokee ways, their stories, their connection to the land. She, in turn, shared memories of her life before, the world she had left behind. They were learning from each other, their understanding deepening, bridging the cultural divide that had once seemed so vast. One afternoon, as they were checking snares, Cale stopped, picking up a small, discarded piece of blue cloth snagged on a bush. His face grew somber. "This belongs to a child from a nearby settlement," he said, his voice low. "A new one, a few days' ride west of here." "I have seen their smoke. What is it doing here?" Sarah asked, a sense of foreboding creeping over her. "I do not know. But it is far from their homes." They followed the faint signs, Cale's tracking skills leading them through the dense undergrowth. After an hour, they found it, a small, hastily abandoned camp. A cooking fire, still faintly warm, a few scattered belongings, signs of a struggle. And then, the horrifying discovery of two fresh graves, crudely dug. "Raiders," Cale said, his voice grim, his eyes hard as flint. "Not Cherokee. White men, by the tracks. Outlaws. They must have attacked the settlement, or a family traveling." Sarah felt sick. The senseless brutality of it, the vulnerability of those settlers, mirrored her own past fears. "Are there any survivors?" "Perhaps," Cale said, his gaze sweeping the area. "They took captives, it seems. The tracks lead north. 2 horses, heavily laden. And smaller footprints, a child." They looked at each other. The unspoken question hung in the air. This was not their fight, not directly. They had their own fragile peace to protect. But the image of a captured child, the desolation of the raided camp, struck a deep chord in both of them. "We cannot simply ignore this, Cale," Sarah said, her voice firm, echoing the conviction he himself had shown. "That child." "I know," he said, his jaw tight. "It is not our way to stand by when innocents suffer." The decision was made, unspoken but absolute. Their own ordeal had forged in them a shared sense of justice, a responsibility that extended beyond their small clearing. They were no longer just 2 individuals surviving against the odds, they were 2 people who had found strength in each other, and a common purpose. They returned to the cabin only to gather essential supplies, food, water, ammunition, Cale's bow and arrows, Sarah's rifle. There was a new urgency in their movements, a grim determination. "This will be dangerous," Cale said, as they prepared to leave. "More dangerous than Tyen's warriors. These men are ruthless. They kill without thought." "I understand," Sarah said, meeting his gaze steadily. "But we have to try." He looked at her, a deep, unreadable emotion in his eyes. "You have come far, Sarah." Jeremiah would be proud. Her heart ached at the mention of her husband, but it was a gentle ache now, softened by the strength she had found, the purpose she now embraced. "I hope so," she whispered. They set out at dawn, following the tracks north. The forest, which had become a place of learning and tentative peace, now felt like a hunting ground once more, fraught with peril. But this time, they were the hunters, driven by a shared resolve to right a terrible wrong. The seeds of change, planted by Cale's first unexpected act of kindness, had taken root, blossomed into courage, and were now bearing the fruit of compassionate action. Their individual pasts, with their losses and hardships, had converged, leading them down this new, perilous path together. They were 2 solitary figures against a vast, indifferent wilderness, yet they were not alone. They had each other, and a bond forged in fire and tempered by a shared humanity that transcended all barriers. The journey ahead would be fraught with peril, but they faced it with open eyes and resolute hearts, their quiet determination a testament to the profound impact they had on each other's lives. The tracks of the raiders were easy enough for Cale to follow, but they moved quickly, pushing their captives hard. Sarah, though her endurance had increased significantly, struggled at times to keep pace with Cale's relentless stride. He never complained, merely slowed when he sensed her fatigue, offering a steadying hand over rough terrain, his concern silent but evident. They traveled for 2 days, the landscape growing wilder, more remote. The signs of the raiders' passage were brutal: discarded belongings from their victims, campsites left in disarray, a chilling disregard for life. With each mile, Sarah's anger and determination grew. This was the kind of savagery she had once mistakenly attributed to Cale's people, now revealed in its stark reality, perpetrated by men of her own kind. "They have no honor," Cale said, his voice tight with disgust, as they surveyed another hastily abandoned camp. "They prey on the weak, like jackals." Late on the second day, they heard it, a faint cry, quickly stifled. Cale motioned for silence, his body instantly alert. They moved forward with extreme caution, like shadows in the fading light. They crested a small rise and looked down into a narrow ravine. There, beside a flickering fire, were 3 men, the raiders. Tied to a tree was a woman, her face bruised and tear-streaked, and a small boy, no more than 6 or 7, huddled beside her, whimpering softly. Sarah's heart clenched. The sight of the child, so small and terrified, ignited a fierce, protective instinct within her. Cale assessed the situation quickly. 3 men, armed. They were relaxed, confident, not expecting pursuit. "We wait for full dark," he whispered to Sarah. "Then we move. I will take the 2 by the fire. You cover the one guarding the captives. Aim to disable, but be ready." The minutes crawled by, each one an agony of suspense. Sarah's palms were sweating, her heart thudding against her ribs. She clutched the rifle, repeating Cale's instructions in her mind. This was not a defensive fight like the one at the cabin. This was an attack, a rescue. The stakes felt impossibly high. When darkness finally enveloped the ravine, deep and complete, Cale gave a silent signal. They moved like phantoms, down the slope, using every rock, every bush for cover. Sarah's senses were stretched to their limit, every sound magnified, every shadow menacing. Cale reached the edge of the firelight first. With breathtaking speed, he launched his attack. An arrow took one raider in the throat before he could even register the threat. He fell without a sound. The second raider, startled, reached for his pistol, but Cale was on him, a blur of motion. His knife flashed. Another life extinguished in brutal, efficient silence. The third raider, the one guarding the captives, whirled around, alerted by the sudden scuffle. He raised his rifle, pointing it towards the woman and child. Sarah didn't hesitate. She fired. The bullet struck the raider in the shoulder, the impact spinning him around, his shot going wild. He screamed in pain and surprise. Before he could recover, Cale was there, disarming him with a swift, decisive blow. The fight was over in moments, brutal and swift. Sarah rushed to the woman and child, her knife quickly severing their bonds. The woman sobbed with relief, clutching her son tightly. "Thank you," she gasped, looking at Sarah and then at Cale with wide, disbelieving eyes. We thought we were dead." Cale dealt with the wounded raider, binding his hands securely. "He will answer for his crimes," he said, his voice cold. "There are settlements to the west. They will know what to do with him." They made camp for the night, a safe distance from the scene of the fight. Sarah comforted the woman, whose name was Martha, and her son, Timmy. Their story was a common one on the frontier: their small farm attacked, her husband killed, they themselves taken for ransom or worse. Listening to Martha's tearful account, Sarah felt a profound empathy, a renewed sense of purpose. What she and Cale had done, it mattered. It had made a difference. The next morning, Cale escorted Martha, Timmy, and their captive towards the nearest settlement, which was still a day's journey. Sarah walked with them, her rifle ready, her gaze constantly scanning their surroundings. When they finally reached the small, fortified outpost, The relief on Martha's face was overwhelming. The settlers were shocked by their story and grateful for the rescue. The captured raider was taken into custody, his fate sealed. As Sarah and Cale prepared to leave, Martha gripped Sarah's hand, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how we can ever repay you," she said. "You saved our lives." Sarah smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Just stay safe," she said. "And know that there is still good in this world, even in the darkest places." As they walked away from the settlement, heading back towards their own quiet clearing, a comfortable silence settled between them. They had faced death together, rescued the innocent, and delivered a measure of justice. Their bond, already deep, had been solidified by this shared act of courage and compassion. "You were good back there, Sarah," Cale said, breaking the silence. "Calm, focused. You saved that boy's life with your shot." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her. His praise, always sparingly given, meant more to her than any other. "I had a good teacher," she replied, echoing her earlier sentiment, but with a new depth of meaning. "And a good partner." He glanced at her, a rare, almost gentle expression in his eyes. "We make a good team." It seems the words were simple, understated, yet they carried the weight of all they had been through. They were more than just a team, they were companions, allies, two souls who had found an unlikely refuge in each other amidst the harshness of the frontier. Their journey had been one of profound transformation, from fear and mistrust to a deep and abiding connection. Sarah, the widow braced for death, had found not only survival but a new strength, a new purpose, and an unexpected love for the land and for the man who had shown her its true heart. Cale, the stoic protector, the lone wolf, had found not just a cause to defend, but a companion who saw beyond his stoicism, who understood his principles, and who stood by him, unwavering. As they approached their clearing, the familiar sight of the small cabin nestled amongst the trees felt like coming home. It was more than just a shelter, it was a testament to their resilience, their shared history, the quiet life they had carved out together against all odds. The world outside was still dangerous, still full of prejudice and conflict. But here, in this small space, they had created something unique, something precious. A place where a Cherokee warrior and a white widow had not only survived but had found a profound and lasting peace, a testament to the enduring power of human connection, courage, and the unexpected grace that can sometimes be found in the most unlikely of circumstances. What the future held, they did not know. But they would face it together, their bond, their strength, their shared past, a foundation for a future they would build, one day at a time, in the heart of the wilderness that had tested them, changed them, and ultimately, united them. The change in Sarah was complete, not just in her ability to survive, but in her very soul. The man she had expected to bring her death had, instead, brought her life, in more ways than she could ever have imagined. And that, she knew, was a gift beyond measure.